slow. In fact, you could, I'm gonna, okay, start the meeting. Okay, should be able to, I'm gonna to do that. And Sam, I'm gonna share Ailish's slides for her. So you'll need to allow me to do that. And is it, are you allowed to make me a co-host, or will it only make me a host?
I can make you a host, but I did do screen share allow. So if you want to go to Will.
Oh, okay. Because I didn't, where did you, we need to talk about that because I couldn't figure out how to let her do that. So let me share the screen, Ailish, and we will be ready to go in a minute. Share. And you see that?
You can.
Yeah. Yeah. If we could go down to, no, just let it stay there as it is for the moment. This was, this is a talk that I gave to the American Bar Association in relation to international trade and the legal ramifications of what's called REEs, which are rare earth elements, and they're also known as REMs, which is rare earth minerals. So I actually called the talk "Hiccup or Hardball." In other words, is this a hiccup in the geopolitical situation, or do we have to play hardball, or will we have to play hardball? Things haven't changed a lot since I gave that in 2017. And I'm just like, I have one small chastisement here for the United States, which is a big, big beef of mine in regard to geopolitics and our interest in global economics and finance and strategic planning. When I hear people here saying, I'm not interested in politics, or I don't care, about privacy regulations because whoever they are, they know everything about me anyway. Both these things are false premises, and both an interest in politics and a supreme interest in our privacy really are vital to our survival as a nation and our survival as global players. It's very short-term thinking and short-term strategizing. And it is endemic in the US in both politics and in business. We have politicians who think short-term to, the next election, and business to the next quarterly reports. And I don't think it is good enough. We need to survive in the long term. And I'm not even talking about the medium term, which is a whole other thing. But we definitely need to strategize for the long term, because that is what China has been doing for the last 50 years. If we remember, China had a massive famine where millions and millions and millions of people died. And in a period of 30 years, nobody was dying from famine, and they did it all themselves. That was their long-term strategy. And they still have long-term strategies for everything. Of course, it's easier for them because they have a one-party system. And that one-party system works very well for any nation that wants to strategize for the long term, having one party rule. But in China, it's not that anymore. It's a one person rule system under Xi Jinping, because he devises the policies, makes the policies, and then hands them down the line and expects them to be implemented nationwide, which they are, because if they're not, somebody pays with their head in a chopping block. And that's not how we work here in the US. But we do here have to deal with what I would call pesky non-subservient politicians at federal, state, and local levels, who often have, they all too often have the sole purpose of that speaking on any subject and voting on any subject as solely as a vehicle to win the next election. And that's not long-term strategizing for the country. And I do believe that our country is we have to change that. We have to change that. I'm not quite sure how to do that. If we go to the next slide, please. Okay, this was my interest in this and my involvement in this stems from my work in regard to training companies in what's called export controls regulations, and certain items and are controlled by the U.S. government, and there are 5 main reasons. And the first is national security, and the second is foreign policy. The third is proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. Fourth is anti-terrorism. Fifth is protecting our valuable intellectual property and thus the livelihoods of the citizens of the US. Next slide, please. Okay, so what I'm talking about is rare earth elements. They're not at all rare, actually. They're known as rare earth elements, and they're the last 17 elements on the periodic table. They're not at all rare. They're actually everywhere. If you go out to your footpath or go out to the path into your house and you dig up, the cement from which it was built, you're going to find traces of rare earth elements in that. So they're everywhere. But the problem is that they're not in sufficient quantities that they can be mined in a way that's both economic to do it, financially viable, and that it's not going to destroy the environment. Because to extract rare earths from other minerals in the mining process is terribly dirty. It's a filthy, dirty business, and it destroys water systems, water tables, and poisons the land in which they're dumped, and not just the water, but the land. But these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 rare earths that are going to be in very short supply in the next 15 years, which are neodymium, yttrium, terbium, dysprosium, and yttrium. Actually, yttrium is an interesting one because that was found in the middle of the 1900s in a little town called Yttrius in Sweden, and that's why it's called yttrium. And it's quite rare. It is rare. It's there. It's in the earth, but it's not. It is certainly not in quantities that we need it. Could have next slide, please. Next slide, please. No. Just let that one stay, because we can see where the concentrations of rare earth elements are, and the largest is China. But within the nation of China, they have the most rare earth elements in the world. But it's not just that; they actually have a monopoly of 96% of global rare earths. Because whilst this happened predominantly whilst we as a nation, had watched before that. But we as a nation entered 2 major land wars, and an awful lot of things that we would have dealt with geopolitically up to that point were discarded and left by the wayside, and we didn't pay attention to them. So we didn't pay attention to China's expansion in relation to rare earths, and they practically took over the entire global supply of rare earths. They went into, for example, sub-Saharan Africa, paid off various countries because there's a huge amount of political corruption in various countries in sub-Saharan Africa, particularly Western Africa, where there's a lot of rare earths. This is in large part why they're not picking a fight either with North Korea. Aside from the fact that they don't want millions and millions of impoverished North Koreans crossing their borders, North Korea has, it would appear, according to US Defense Department data, that North Korea has substantial substantial deposits of mineable rare earths. So China is currently mining those. And that's what's happened as well in Afghanistan. We handled Afghanistan really badly. There's a lot of rare earths in Afghanistan. Chinese got the contract to extract it, which is just awful. But anyway, that's how it is. We stopped extracting rare earths when we started the two land wars, and we had a place in Mountaintop in California, a mine which was mining rare earths, and we were subsidizing. It's very expensive to do it. In the US, because we have such strict environmental regulations, that it was impossible for the company that owned the mine in Mountaintop in California to extract the rare earths, but it was being subsidized by the government, and the government then stopped subsidizing it, so the company stopped extracting rare earths. So there was no rare earths being extracted in the US at all. They have started that within the last 4 or 5 years again, but it's in its infancy stage. And an interesting thing that I find, to me, is very interesting. Back in 1987, again, this is the importance of paying attention to what governments say and do. Back in 87, the Chinese president, I don't know if any of you remember this guy, he was a short guy, not very attractive, but he had a really funny smile, and his name was Deng Xiaoping. Do any of you remember Deng Xiaoping?
I do.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm. Okay, I remember Deng Xiaoping. In 87, he made a statement that was ignored, which was a huge mistake. He said, the Middle East has oil. China has rare earths. And nobody paid attention to him because nobody saw the long-term ramifications and need for rare earths, but the Chinese did. They did, and they saw that oil was a finite product, which it is. There's a finite amount of it in the world. There's also a finite amount of rare earths, but if you have a global monopoly on them, it doesn't really matter how finite they are. This is not an economic fight. This is a geopolitical fight and a geopolitical strategy by the Chinese. And it's really important to remember that they made that decision and publicly told the world that in 1987. Now, Deng Xiaoping at the time, China legitimately partnered with foreign companies that were doing complex work of separating rare earths from the surrounding rock, because that is the difficult part, is to extract it, to separate the rare earths from the surrounding rocks and refine them. And they're doing that where they are, and then they're moving the production to mainland China. And that's what they've done in sub-Saharan Africa. That's what they've done in parts of South America, in Southeast Asia. And they own these mines. An example of this would be back probably about 15 years ago, and I remember reading about this. Australia had, right somewhere in the heartland, way out in the wilderness of Australia, and there's a lot of wilderness in Australia. What they call it in the bush. But out in the bush in Australia, there was a copper mine, which belonged to a family, which was family owned and run for years. And then this family decided that they wanted to sell it. But about 2 years before they had come to that decision, there was a lot of Chinese were coming to Australia under the guise of being on vacation and hiking in the bush. But what they were doing was they were scoping out this mine. And eventually the mine came for sale. China decided to buy it. There were no other buyers because it was family run and it wasn't highly developed as a mine. China saw the value of it because they wanted something like 1,000 acres around the entire mine, the whole way around it. They wanted this 1,000 acres around it because they found rare earth elements. They didn't say anything. These people who were supposedly tourists were not. They were geologists. And they found rare earth. They bought the mine. They brought in, like they're doing in Angola, for example, they're bringing in people from China to do the mining, to do the separation, to do the refining, and then shipping that to China for production into the final product that is needed. So that's what they're doing, for example, the miners. They're not hiring locals, and they're doing the same, for example, in Angola and Namibia. But they have actually, in 2010, what the Chinese did was in fact, they weaponized to an extent the export of rare earth elements. And this happened over Japan. There was a territorial dispute with Japan over what's known as the Senkaku Islands, where there was a boat collision between a Chinese fishing trawler and a Japanese military ship. The Chinese fishing trawler rammed the Japanese ship deliberately. The Japanese took the captain of the ship and held him and whatever. And China immediately stopped exporting rare earth elements to Japan. And Japan is a high-tech economy. Their entire economy is almost built on high tech and the need for rare earths, which is in everything high tech, your cell phone, your airplanes, your everything defense, everything digital. It's there. It's in it in quantities. For example, the F-35 fighter aircraft has something like near half a ton of rare earths. Well, are we going to send the F-35s to China to be manufactured if China were to weaponize the export of rare earths? But that incident with Japan went all the way to the World Trade Organization, and the United States, the EU, and Japan prevailed. But China had definitely thrown a salvo across the bow and said, if you don't behave yourselves, we are going to weaponize this thing that we have 98% global monopoly on. And if you want to manufacture anything, you'll have to send it to us to manufacture. It's a very large control. Okay. Could we go to the next slide?
Sorry, Ailish, I was trying to unmute myself and I accidentally hit the wrong button.
Okay.
I do have a question about that. When the fishing boat rammed you said the Chinese fishing boat rammed the Japanese military?
Yeah.
Did they do that just to set that precedent to say, look what we can do?
Well, the Chinese are not going to admit that, and they didn't admit that. Their argument was that the Japanese were protecting what is still known as the Senkaku Islands, which the Chinese claimed. The Japanese, the person who owned the Senkaku Islands, actually, they were privately owned islands, and they sold these islands to the Japanese nobody knew until the deal was done. The Chinese went ballistic and they said they're in our waters. The Japanese said, no, they're ours. So the Japanese were like protecting the island that they bought from this individual owner. And the Chinese, were fishing in the waters, which they said they were entitled to do because it was international waters. The Japanese said, no, they're not international waters. They belong to us because we own the Senkaku Islands. Okay. And it was a huge to-do at the time. I mean, it was a very, very big deal at the time,
When was that? Did you say? I didn't catch that.
What?
When was that? When was that boat?
That was in 2010.
Oh, you did say that. Okay. I just
Yeah,
had a
2010.
Okay, thanks. Just curious.
That was 2010. Could we get the next slide? Let's go on to the next one. Okay, this is a periodic table, and the rare earths are the rows that you see at the bottom. Now, I am not a scientist. Please don't ask me a scientific question. I'm not interested in the science of it. I'm just not a scientist. My interest is in the geopolitics of the thing. So could we go to the next one? These are the rare earths in larger form that we can see. There's a lot of them and they're all important. So we go to the next one. What are they used in? They're used in practically everything that we use today. And this is just a list of some of the things, right? And again, I go back to the F-35 jet fighter, which is around 0.5 ton of REEs, and that's a huge amount. And some of the let me just go back. Scandium, for example, is one of the elements, and that costs about $15,000 a pound. That'll just give you an example of how important they are. So could we go to the next slide? Okay, they're also involved with the green energy, the batteries that run all these things. The batteries are produced to have a substantial amounts of rare earths. They can't work, they can't operate without the rare earths that do whatever they do scientifically. And again, I'm not a scientist, but I just know that these things are run with a lot of rare earths in the magnets in particular. So could we go to the next one? Go to the next, because that's just a showing where some of the rare earths are found and what the ore actually looks like as raw. Thank you. Okay. All right, so we have that. We know the 3 top producers, China, Russia, and Malaysia, and not too many of those, in fact, are friends of ours. You know, Malaysia is to an extent, but only when it suits them. And Malaysia hasn't given up its rare earths. Neither has Russia. But China practically owns the global supply of REEs from across the world, with the exceptions of Russia and Malaysia. Can we go to the next one? Okay, we did talk about Deng Xiaoping. Okay, we can go to the next one. Even though he made the front page of Time, people didn't pay attention to him at all. Okay, we did talk about Japan. We can go to the next one. And we can go to the next one. Next one. Sorry. Thanks. Some companies in the US have been trying to work with the Chinese, particularly the larger high-tech companies like Apple, GE, GM, etc. They're trying to partner with the Chinese government and Chinese companies, which actually are all owned by the Chinese government. There's no point in saying Chinese companies, because we're really talking about the Chinese government. Because no Chinese company can deal with any outside company without the imprimatur of the Chinese government. So in other words, they are run by the Chinese government. And there's no point in pretending otherwise, especially in these really critical industries. You know, they're not going to let the reins go. So there's talk about partnering, but there's now, since about 9 months ago, there's talk in these companies are now talking for the first time about trying to get to reach into sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Asia to get rare earths and to partner with companies in these countries to try and get access to rare earths. An example, Joe Biden, when he came into power, had a 100-day review called Building Resilient Supply Chains, Revitalizing American Manufacturing and Fostering Broad-Based Growth. And he was looking at it obviously from the point of view of domestic consumption, but looking at the global supply chain, which we didn't realize how fragile it was until COVID happened. We really didn't. And the total fragility of the global supply chain is extraordinary, and it's extraordinarily weak, and it hasn't strengthened. So he had this 100-day review, which came up with some really, really interesting scenarios, and it's well worth reading it. Actually, it's not terribly long, but it's well worth reading it for those who are interested. But it does go into rare earths, and it's hoping to find U.S. companies that can partner inside the U.S. and with Canada in particular, because there are rare earths in Canada too, trying to get a complete handle on our own supply of rare earths. Because if we continue to be totally dependent on China, well, they can weaponize the export of rare earths and leave us all with nothing, and our economies will collapse. And it's a dangerous situation in which to find ourselves. But a very interesting thing has happened. This is really, really interesting. In 2018, and this is not in the slides, in 2018, Japan, which has very little sort of minerals in that sense, it has to import almost everything. They were trawling, doing some research in relation to fishing off the coast of Japan, and they found about, actually to be exact, 1,150 miles southwest of Tokyo in the Pacific Ocean. They found roughly a 965 square mile area of the seabed, which contains vast amounts of rare earth elements. Vast amounts. And apparently, just let me get my figures here, the data here. Give me a second. Okay. And this is, if this turns out to be true, and this was reported in the Wall Street Journal, that Japanese researchers estimate that roughly 2,499 square kilometer region of the seabed holds more than 16 million, with an M, million tons of rare earth oxides, including 780 years worth of global supply of yttrium, very important rare earth, and 620 years worth of europium, 420 years worth of terbium, 730 years worth of dysprosium. The find could challenge China's dominance on rare earths world market, but extracting such metals from the seabed is expensive and difficult. And who's going to put up the money, and who has the money? Now, here is my particular take on this, looking geopolitically. There's a set of the Chinese government went out into the South China Sea because they're claiming large swaths of the South China Sea, of Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, etc. They're saying that theirs, because these smaller countries are small and weak and ineffective and can't control their portions of the South China Sea. So China's gone out and actually built islands in the middle of the South China Sea, and have since put military hardware on these islands, and they built the islands so that they can house container ships, submarines, and military aircraft carriers. And they've this huge swathe of South China Sea on which they have built these islands. And I wonder why. If there's 16 million tons of rare earths under the Pacific, and they know exactly where it is, and they know the extent of it, they know how to find it, but nobody, I argue, except the Chinese, have the financial wherewithal to extract it. And they don't care. They don't care about environmental issues. They really don't care about environmental issues. Whereas the Japanese, the US, the Canadians, the Aussies, whoever, would be constrained by various environmental constraints at national and international level, which they would adhere to, or which they would try to adhere to. The Chinese have no such problems. They say they'll do stuff, but they don't. And they have been proven, just not to adhere to international trade regulations or trade supply routes, except where it benefits them, without taking any global benefit into consideration at all. And it's unfortunate. Could we go to the next slide? I can't even remember what that is. I do know that the Department of Defense and the Department of the Environment have stockpiled rare earths since 2010, but that was too late, because at that point, we had been in two major land wars for years, and we didn't pay attention, and China had the monopoly garnered at that point. But it is important that they have stockpiled. No one knows how much. The Department of the Environment is an important department when it comes to stockpiling of rare earths, because they oversee, for example, everything nuclear. And most people are unaware that the Department of Energy, I should say, the Department of Energy, oversees everything nuclear. So could we go to the next slide, please? Now, we did talk about North Korea, and that still stands. So could we go to the next slide? Well, that's not actually true anymore. We do now know. We didn't know at the time that I did this back in 2017 that the US knew or had fairly solid knowledge of the amounts of rare earths that that were contained in North Korea that were mineable. But we do know now, there's a couple of leaks and for things like that. DOD does now know what substantially the amounts of rare earths that are contained in North Korea. So if we go to the next slide, please. Well, South Korea has been sort of aiming at North Korea, but generally politically, it's been sort of eras of appeasement, which is of no value whatsoever when it comes to North Korea, because they're going to do whatever China tells them. And if if China will say to us, yes, we are trying to contain their proliferation of nuclear armaments, well, we know darn fine that if it suits China, they're not going to do that. So the South Koreans are at a total disadvantage politically and militarily, because North Korea has the largest army in the world. It's larger than China. It's huge. They have just huge number of men and women in military service. Now, how effective they would be if push came to shove, because it's a very impoverished country, we really don't know that, because we did see that when Russia invaded Ukraine. We thought this huge nation was going to, run over them in 48 hours, and they didn't. So we don't know. We really don't know how any military is going to operate until it's put to the test. So if we could get go to the next slide, please. Yes, this was true. The US was the largest producer of rare earths until the 2000s, until we went into two major land wars. We were. And that was in California, Montana, and I think Missouri. So if we go to the next slide, please. We have them in abundance, but they're so toxic to extract them from the earth. It's like, what do you call this? For oil, where you inject toxins into the rocks.
Fracking?
Fracking, thank you. I mean, that's extremely toxic, but that's under the ground. And I'm not saying that that's wrong. I'm not saying that it's right, but it's under the ground, so we can't see it. But when you extract rare earths, it's usually from mountaintop mining, where you can see it, it's exposed. And you're exposing the earth, not underground, not, miles and miles underground, but on top of the earth. You're exposing the land that we use, the water tables that we use, which are just below the earth, just below the main earth.
And Ailish, that's what's truly terrifying about all that availability under the ocean, because how are they going to mine that and not completely poison all of us? Even if if it's not China doing it, anybody doing it, it's going to be an absolute nightmare to get that stuff mined.
A complete nightmare, because there's a huge potential to destroy the entire ocean ecosystem in vast swathes, or the entire Pacific, which then, if you do that in the Pacific, all of the oceans are joined. They're not divided. They're all conjoined at some point, and that means that we can destroy, that there is the potential to destroy the entire ocean ecosystem, which is our means of survival.
Very much so. I mean,
it's terrifying.
It reminds me of Kimberly Carroll, who's not on this call, sadly. She said to me one day, having a no smoking section in a restaurant is like having a no peeing section in a pool. It's sort of that same concept. Whatever happens in the Pacific, where this is, it's going to spread throughout the world. It could kill all of us. I mean, global warming first, but who knows? This is going to expedite that, I'm sure.
Yes, and actually, there's a whole other area that we're just not looking at. In fact, I got a message today from a really, really, really good friend of mine on LinkedIn, and he used to work in the State Department, but he now works in GSA, General Services Administration, and his job is, in fact, he's in charge of cleaning up some of these toxic sites all over the country where companies have dumped toxins for years, and these are vast sites and hugely toxic, and then the companies have gone bust and opened up somewhere else and left and left the federal government to clean these up. So he's in charge of all that. And he was telling me this morning that his son and his daughter, he was taking them to college. One is going to Vermont, and the other is going to Missouri, to St. Paul is in, I keep thinking Missouri, but it's not. St. Paul is, what state is St. Paul? Minneapolis.
Yeah.
Minneapolis, thank you. Okay. So one child is going to Minneapolis and the other child is going to Vermont. And he is taking them to college. So I sent a message and I said, I hope that one of them is going to study something in the geological sciences. And he understood why. So he hasn't come back to me on that. But what we don't know is there's only a handful of colleges in the United States, which has degree granting university programs in mining or mineral related anything. By comparison, China has 3 times as many graduates in the geology sciences as the rest of the world combined. That is huge. That is just huge. It shows where their long-term strategy, I go back to what I said at the beginning, that we've got to stop having short-term strategies for everything. And I know I'm sort of now entering the political area, and we're supposed to be non-political. Well, I think this is fairly non-political. We've got to vote for people who show us and who tell us that they are seeking long-term strategies for the sustainability of our country as a nation and our sustainability as a global player. Because if we're not a global player, I mean, it sort of reminds me in a sense of the when we opted out of the Asia Pacific contract that we had under Obama, the first day Donald Trump came into power. What was that called?
Like his Hope campaign, a New Hope campaign?
No. We had in fact a treaty with something like 20 Asia Pacific countries, the US, Canada, Australia, the EU, for trade.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I can't think of the acronym for it right now.
Can't think of the acronym for it. But Trump opted out of that on his very first day in office. And where that was going and where that was keeping these countries together on our side was substantially to do with rare earth elements. Substantially. And we had all these South Pacific countries, including Australia and New Zealand, and we supported the European Union. Well, as soon as we pulled out of it, China went in and got at least 15 of those countries in a bound treaty arrangement with the Chinese government. So we lost out. So we've got to vote people in who are going to seek, that we can seek, that they will strategize for us in the medium to long term, particularly the long term, that we can see what they're going to do, and we ask them and we demand that they tell us what they're going to do. Not that they're going to ban a book, or that that somebody is woke or somebody isn't woke, or somebody's dead on arrival or whatever. I'm not interested in those things. I'm interested in the long-term sustainability of our economy and of our country and our nation, because we're worth salvaging. We're well worth salvaging. I think I'll kind of stop at that, because if I don't, I'll go off on a tangent.
I agree with you. I think it's a tangent worth going. But was it Trans-Pacific? Maybe was it the Trans-Pacific one?
The Trans-Pacific Partnership. That's exactly what it was. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. TPP. TPP. Yeah.
Hey,
That's exactly what it was.
I have to jump off and get back to the teaching I have to do around 1. I can be a couple minutes late. Are we close to the end?
Yeah, I know. I'm done. I'm done because I would go on for another hour on this particular subject. So I'm done.
Maybe.
Oh, look at that. That's a good way to close. My little boy likes your picture.
You
Hey
like that?
there.
What have you done?
That's a cute little dog. Is that the end? Oh,
Yeah, that's the end. Yeah. We'll end it there.
back up. All right. And I'm going to stop sharing. Sorry, I jumped around a little bit, Ailish, but once in a while I'd touch my mouse just by accident and it would.
That's okay, honey. It's okay.
I didn't mean to be so disconcerting for you.
No,
Great
at least you know what you're doing. If it was up to me, I wouldn't know what I was doing.
All right.
Thank you.
Good at faking it.
Well, thank you so much, Ailish. I'm sure there's a couple of questions. While folks are putting their thinking cap on or formulating that question, I just wanted to comment. You brought up the F-35, and the bad news is in my business. So, first of all, appreciating your perspective and appreciating your explaining some of the concepts around the trade and everything is political, just like you said. Everything is.
Yes.
Same. I heard almost exactly the same phraseology from a woman named Katie Arrington. And so, if anybody doesn't know that name, Katie Arrington is the Chief Information Security Officer for DoD Department of Acquisitions. Translation, she is the one human being responsible for deciding how the military buys and from whom. And she said almost exactly the same thing you did. She said everything's political because, like, for example, if we're talking about Huawei, the call that I was listening to, the conversation I was listening to was about Huawei and the banning of Huawei products in all DoD and DoD supporting, which means basically the whole federal government. There is no Huawei allowed.
Right.
What is that word you're using? I can't catch it.
A Huawei. It's a Chinese tech company that's been substantially banned.
Yeah.
You might remember the story. There was the Huawei CEO was arrested in Canada. There was a big.
Yeah.
Anyway, so the U.S. doesn't buy any Huawei products, and the conversation she led us to in this talk was that everything's political, if you really get down to it, because even something as simple as banning Huawei is actually nothing to do with the technical concerns or whatever. It is in fact based on a congressional law that was signed by Trump banning the sale of products. So it is by definition political. Now, is it a risk? Yes, of course it's a risk. Are the rare earth elements a risk? Yes, of course they're a risk. But it has to come down, just like you said, to voting for the people who can express our beliefs, voting for the people who can address these concerns competently. That's the challenge. And then the other silly comment, the fun comment that I made was you happen to bring up F-35. I didn't know if you did that on purpose because it just so happens the Chinese stole the plans for the F-35. It was the most expensive intellectual property lost in the history of the DoD. So the Chinese actually stole the designs and stole the trade deals to get all the parts to make it. So.
Well, I actually did that deliberately because as a kind of a side sort of bit of humor. Somebody said, I lost my job at the bank on my first day. An old lady asked me to check her balance, so I pushed her over.
You win the next joke of the award, the week's joke. Awesome, hilarious.
But that's in essence what we did to the F-35.
Well,
Dave. I had a question. In your beginning pie chart, you showed that China had 36% or so of the rare earth metals, but you said they control 96% of the market. Is that because they went in other countries and bought up supplies that way?
They went worldwide. When we started our two land wars, now they had started before that, but when we started two land wars and took our eyes completely off every other ball around the globe, they went very stealthily. It's what they call you know, smile diplomacy. The Chinese will come in and bow and smile, and we all think they're very nice and they're lovely and all the rest of it, and I'm quite sure they are, but they smile. It's what's called smile diplomacy, and everybody thinks they're harmless devils, and they're not.
No,
And no, they're very harmful.
I have to sign off, guys. You all have a great
Susie,
rest. Sorry.
Susie, thank you so
Great
much
job,
for doing
Ailish.
that.
I'm
I
glad-
appreciate it.
It was good to hear that again, and yet terrifying. So
I find it terrifying, and that's why I keep talking about it.
thanks for jumping on and doing that for us. Bye, everybody. Oh,
Thank
for
you.
those who live in town, we're going to go see Kraz this Saturday. Let me know if you want to come. David, George, Roy, fly down. We haven't seen you in a couple of months. You know, Ailish is coming. Heidi, maybe you can come up. Anyway, let me know if you want to come see Kraz do his improv thing. So I am bringing a 15-year-old, soon to be 15-year-old boy. So hopefully it'll be cool. I mean, it won't be any nudity, right, that I have to worry about. All right, guys, gotta run. Love you guys. Bye.
Ailish, I have another, not a question, but another comment. I was just curious if you had read it, but if anybody's interested, if you really want to get in the weeds on some of this, there's actually a published, it's based on the dossiers. I don't know who had it, if it was the CIA or if it was MI6, but it's a translated portfolio, basically like a playbook on how the Chinese military seeks to acquire intellectual property from the G20 nations in any way, shape, or form, through hacking, through espionage, through corporate acquisition, et cetera, et cetera. And it's called Unrestricted Warfare. And you can buy this. It's a very short read. It's called Unrestricted Warfare. And it actually includes rare earth elements and the conversations around what you were talking about today. So I don't know if you've ever seen that, but that's
No, I haven't, but I now know it exists, and I will get it. I did send you a little note privately here. If you could have a wee look at that, because
I wish.
Huh?
I wish. That's my response. I wish I did.
Oops. Okay. Okay, you don't. Oh well, then I'll find her, because I have my own contacts in there, so I'll find her. But you said she was what? She was in.
She's currently the CISO, or Chief Information Security Officer, and she works for DOA, Department of Acquisitions, for the DoD, Department of Defense.
Okay. Okay. I'll get my pal in state to find her, because I would be really interested in having her. She is that's exactly what I need for some of the programs that I'm doing.
Okay, well, with that, if there's no other questions, we can call it a meeting. Thank you again, Ailish, so much for speaking to us today on that. I wonder, I'm going to go back into recording. I wonder if I can do some further research. I wonder if there's more up-to-date data that I can send links to you, and we can update the presentation. Maybe we can put in some fresher stuff, see what the trends say, see what the data says in terms of the last 10 years or so.
Okay. Oh, here's one just for everybody, who's still there. I just want to give you one last little giggle. I told my wife I almost hit a deer on the way to work. She asked me how I knew the deer was headed to work.
But
sorry about that.
That was good.
We all need to smile. There's just too much
enduring.
sadness and rage and anger and all that stuff all over the world. So we need to smile more. I believe in that.
I thought you were going to give a new version of the I hit a cat, and then they say, what did the cat look like before you hit it?
No, I didn't hear that.
All right. Well, take care, everybody. Yeah.
Thank you, Sam. Thank you. Take care. Bye.